Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice, Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. So today I want to do we may want to call it another deep dive into the impact of gut health. And gut health, digestion, just overall, I really want to talk about. And I know I've done some similar topics around gut health and the roles that stress play, but I see this so often with clients, and this can be I think it's just like challenging for us to understand in its entirety of what really is stress and then the roles, short term and long term, that it can really have on our gut health. And, I know I did an episode on how this impacts hormones. I want to do another deep dive into gut health because this is such a big topic. And this is something that, man, so many quote unquote gut specialists or gut experts, all these people who only rely on stool testing for gut health and looking at the gut microbiome, if we want to call it that, looking for inflammation and intestinal permeability, quote unquote leaky gut, all the things. This can be a huge mistake if this is the only thing that we're focusing on. And this is why so many gut healing protocols fail long term. And even some of the really big people in this space, and I'm not going to name names. I don't like to do that. There's a couple, but there's one I'm thinking of in particular, and he does a lot with gut health. He does a lot, especially with SIBO, and he loves to reference a handful of studies on antimicrobial protocols and how they're so supportive for SIBO and getting rid of SIBO. And the reality is while that is true, we're missing the bigger picture. These studies are also done at 6-week increments. I will tell you, as someone who personally dealt for years with SIBO issues specifically, yeah, the antimicrobial protocols absolutely work just as well, if not better, than these antibiotics. Depends on the person. And I can also tell you, if you don't look at all of the things that are impacting how and why that bacteria came up from the large intestine in the first place, it's going to come back. And this is why SIBO in particular is deemed very challenging to get rid of. Guess what? It's actually not. Once again, I tell you this for personal experience. We also have, hundreds and hundreds of case studies of individuals who have had SIBO. And here's the thing. If you're only looking at one piece, if you're only looking at the bacterial issues, whether that's SIBO or other types of dysbiosis, if you're only looking at digestive enzymes, if you're only looking at yeast and fungal issues, if you're only looking at parasites, you're missing the picture. You're missing the bigger picture. And this is why it can be, once again, quote unquote, very challenging to heal your gut and have really good gut health long term. I also think we need to look at this from a bigger perspective. And I'm going to talk about kind of short term, acute kind of issues, but I also do want to talk closer to the end about the long term impacts of this. And I'm going to use myself, of course, as an example and how we really need to look at maintenance. We also need to look at support when inevitably all of us at some point in our lives, most likely, are going to go through very stressful periods of time. And when we have these histories of many of these issues, of gut issues, it's not uncommon for the fear of when we are not doing everything perfectly or to our plan, whatever that plan may be, how do we still support our gut health? And what does that really look like? And are you doomed to go back to where you started? if not worse. And so I want to talk about all of that because once again, these are all questions and topics that we get a lot of questions about. We get, just a lot of people want to know more about this. And like, what if I do a protocol? What if it comes back? It's like, okay. And we're going to walk you through this in a way that as long as you're supporting your body, and we're going to talk about what that can look like. And once again, I'm going to talk about the role of stress because this is like the overarching factor of if it's going to come back, this is probably going to be a massive factor in this. What do we do? How do we support our bodies? And when we look at this from a more comprehensive overview, which is how we view it in our practice, why do we do it this way? And why is this different than many, many other practitioners out there? We are by no means the only one doing this. And there's a lot of people not doing this. And once again, this is not something that we were very specifically trained in how to do this. We were trained in a lot of body systems and supporting the body, at least from our background, from a systems, from they call it the foundations kind of standpoint, but they really did work with a lot of things, in my opinion, in isolation. And this is where a lot of practitioners are coming from. And that perspective, or from a very test heavy perspective, which testing can be really good, can be really valuable, and it's not the be all end all. And there is such a thing as over testing. And I don't think personally that all testing is absolutely necessary and or required. Um, Especially something like a stool test. Not a big fan of a stool test. And I'm gonna get it, we're gonna talk about it. Okay, so let's just dive in. So sorry, real quick, before I start going down all of these topics here, I do also want to share that in the show notes, I'm going to put a link to our gut health masterclass. It is free. It is 2 hours and it covers a lot of these topics in a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk a little bit bigger picture here by and large. So this masterclass is going to go a little bit more in depth. There's a whole section in that masterclass on stress and the impact of stress and the definition of stress, which I am going to talk about here because I think this is super important, especially when it comes to gut health. We need to look at all of this. So I'm gonna put the gut health masterclass down below. It's awesome. We have gotten very, very good feedback. We've had that out for probably close to a year and a half now, if not a little bit longer. So we'll share that in the show notes. So be sure to check that out. Okay, so I think once again, I want to start with a little bit of a definition of what is stress. And I also want to tie some of this specifically to gut health and where, I talked a little bit about this in the hormone and stress episode. There's a couple other things I want to add in here. And then I want to talk about how stress impacts from a physiological standpoint and then get into, keep going down that road. Okay. So stress. Let's talk about big picture stress. Big picture stress. Work stress, family stress, life stress, financial stress, emotional stress, all of the stressors. So, we have all of these, we'll call them most of those are external stressors within our lives. External stress can have a definite impact. Women are more sensitive to stress, especially in our luteal phase, so the second half of our cycle, so the period right before our period, the time right before our period. So we were in our luteal phase for the average, and I was trying to think of a different word. Most commonly, women are in their luteal phase for about 10 to 12 days on average. This is also if you are a different person. If you feel so emotional, irritable, moody, you don't sleep in the second half of your cycle, or sleep changes quite a bit, maybe you feel very, very puffy during that time period, your progesterone is lowered, which means your body's ability to handle stress is also dropping. I think that's really important to understand. So a lot of women will experience bloating, a lot of bloating, a lot of water retention before their period during this luteal phase. Super common. I would say to a certain extent, this is normal. And by normal, I do mean in the optimal, if we're looking at the optimal range. Right before when my periods are really, really good, I still have just like, I'm not even sure I'd call it bloating. We can call it maybe just some fluid retention for 2 or 3 days beforehand. I can notice it. I can pretty much guarantee no one else is going to notice it. It's not extensive. It is primarily just some localized inflammation where my uterus is in that lower part of the belly. Very normal. Bowel movements right before my period might have just a tiny bit of slowing. And then once my period starts, just a little bit of speeding up, but I am not constipated beforehand. I'm not having straight up what we call period poops, which is like really loose stool when you start your period. That is not happening, but stress can play a really big role in this, and hormones and stress and prostaglandins and all of these. There's a lot of different factors that can play a role here. But we are going to be more sensitive to gut issues, largely because of stress. We are not meant, especially as women, to be stressed out all of the time. Our bodies were not meant to handle it. And this is why so many more women have autoimmune diseases. So many more women have just like chronic health issues, chronic pain, chronic inflammatory issues. This is a big piece here. And that is to say, all of this impacts our gut health and our digestion. So if you are noticing these changes, especially as a woman who is cycling, this is not uncommon. When we start to go through perimenopause, which this is not age dependent, we'll say 35 is a common time for things to start shifting. And as we all know, if you're a regular listener, I've been through this process twice already, and I am 36, and I have gotten myself out of this twice now. So sometimes we're all going to go through this process. I'm going to go through perimenopause at some point. I'm going to be postmenopausal at some point, and that doesn't mean all of this phase, 10 years plus, give or take, needs to be a nightmare. And the reality is hormones can impact our gut. Constipation is not uncommon during a certain period of perimenopause. Some women go the opposite way, but estrogen can play a big role in this and our estrogen to progesterone ratio. So just throwing that out there, there is a hormone connection here for women and our gut health sometimes. This is also why during perimenopause that if we have underlying gut issues that can be traced back to stress, very, very important that we address that. And once again, we can look at the hormone side of things, really valuable to look at the hormone side of things. Not great to only look at the hormone side of things because the gut impacts hormones, hormones impact the gut, stress impacts everything. And there's many other pieces, our whole body's interconnected. So we can't just look at one piece. The way Western medicine is designed is really wild to me. Like, oh, I'm only going to look at your heart. Or I'm only going to look at your blood. I'm only going to look at your brain. Okay, but what about the rest of my body? It's all connected. I don't just have like a brain separate from the rest of my body. My blood is inside of my body, fueling and circulating throughout my entire body, providing nutrients, oxygen, all kinds of stuff to keep me alive. So why are we only looking at that? Which is, once again, just wild. And when practitioners in the functional health space, I only look at gut health. And so we're going to do stool testing. We're going to do that. Like, what? You're doing the same thing as Western medicine, just in a different way. We have to look at everything all together because our body's so interconnected. Our physical body, emotional body, mental body, spiritual body. And if we look at health, gut health, hormone health, cognitive health, digestive health, inflammatory health, all of these things matter, and they're so interconnected that the whole goal of holistic functional health is to look at the whole thing all together. Okay, anyways. Stress. So we have these external stressors. We also, some of the more obvious stressors, specifically when it comes to gut health from an internal perspective, we'll say internal, external, antibiotic use. If you are my age or older, the chances that you had heavy antibiotic use as a child is a little bit higher than kids nowadays, most likely. They were giving out antibiotics for everything when I was growing up. I was on antibiotics so much. I remember there was a period of time where I had strep so much, and I remember taking just the amoxicillin, that pink, gross liquid. So, I mean, multiple times a year. Of course, that was terrible. We also need to look at, where does our gut health come from in the first place? So when we are born, vaginally, sorry, I just bought my computer if you're watching, that was the issue. So when we are born vaginally, one of the last things that happen from a very simple perspective is we're basically like getting our gut health from our mother. When we look at gut issues running in families, specifically the women in the families, is it really genetic, or was everyone just born vaginally and got the same, maybe not best microbiome diversity as a starting point? That is more likely than an actual strong genetic component. Not discounting genetics here and there, and I find this to be a much bigger factor. Were you breastfed? What was your mother's nutrient status while she was breastfeeding? All of this matters. How long did she breastfeed? Were you given formula? What was the composition of that formula? I'm not saying any of this is good or bad. I am not shaming anyone for having C-sections. I am not shaming anyone for not breastfeeding, for not. There's absolutely zero shame or blame here. And understanding where our gut health is coming from can give us really valuable information as to, where did we even start from? Did we start from a deficit to begin with? If you are born via a C-section, you miss out on getting that bacteria from your mother on the way out. You're starting from a deficit. And then if you weren't able to breastfeed, once again, for whatever reason, no shame, you're probably going to be lacking some nutrients and some good things that can be very beneficial for the early development of your gut health. Throw antibiotics on that. Let's throw in trauma in this too. And we can look at trauma from anywhere, but especially early childhood trauma. If your mother had a really stressful pregnancy, traumatic birth, a lot of stress and trauma early on, super, super common to have digestive issues from the get-go. And I will tell you from my personal experience, so I dealt with constipation, and I can't even remember at what age I noticed or remembered this. But I remember, I mean, I was hospitalized in high school, middle school or high school. When I say high school, can't totally remember, for constipation. And it was a joke in my family. And that made me so full of shame. I was already afraid to share anything that was wrong with me. I was afraid to do all of that just because of my trauma history. And I was constantly being yelled at. And even if I tried to do the right thing, I was yelled at for trying to do the right thing. I was told emotions were wrong. The lovely life of growing up without a single alcoholic parent. So that plays a big role. So if you had a lot of early childhood trauma, you better believe this also had a big impact on your gut health. I also know that I started having acid reflux and heartburn issues in my early 20s. Now, could some of that have been from the trauma? Absolutely. Could some of that have been from not making the best choices? There was a lot of pizza in my life there for a while, and a lot of alcohol. Neither one is particularly great. Looking at the quality, especially the quality and the amount I was drinking and not sleeping and all of the things in my, late teens into my early 20s situation, none of it was great. None of it was super supportive of my gut health. Of course, I had all kinds of gut issues. We find that a lot of people who have constipation type issues and have had this for a good portion of their life, a lot of it what is trauma based. And not saying that we don't do other physical things to help and support with this. And there's often a very strong emotional and or energetic component because likely you were told you were too much, you were wrong, and you started holding on to everything, including your bowels. Intentionally or unintentionally, your subconscious mind was doing this to you. So that plays a really, really big role in all of this. So not only do we need to look at stress, internal, external stress currently, but also for the entirety of our lives. When did this start? Did we start from a deficit? How did that impact our life growing up? A lot of us were not, I know for me, like I ate decently growing up, and I remember having juice boxes, Capri Suns, a soda here and there, pizza and various other foods that I would consider not super supportive. I was also quote unquote diagnosed as lactose intolerant very early on. And once again, there was a lot of shame that came along with that because I would go and I would have milk every day for lunch in early elementary school. And then I would go to the nurse after lunch saying I had a stomach ache every day. They thought I was lying. I was just making it up because I didn't want to go to class or whatever. And yeah, I had a real digestive issue, and every day my stomach hurt because of the milk. And so, these patterns carry on and can carry through our lives. And sometimes it's very challenging to consciously remember all of this, which is a big reason why we talk about health history. When we talk about the healing process, when did some of this start? Has this been most of your life? Okay. If it's been most of your life, let's look really early on. What was going on? Once again, how were you brought into this world? What did your first few months and years kind of look like? Was there a lot of antibiotic use? Was there a lot of processed food growing up? Was there a lot of soda consumption? A lot of just different things that are not maybe the best for our gut health. And that can impact us short term for sure. Some people can hang on for a while, and at some point, things add up enough and they start to go wrong. And that's usually where gut issues come from. It's not usually a one off kind of issue. All of a sudden, we have all of these gut issues going on. It's a slow build, and sometimes we just don't really notice it until things get really bad. So this goes along with autoimmune diseases. We talk about the gun gets loaded, and then there's an event of some sort that pulls the trigger, and then all of a sudden we have a full-blown autoimmune disease. Well, it didn't really actually come out of nowhere. It was a slow build. There was a combination of factors here. Same thing with gut health. There's a combination of factors, and stress, big picture stress, is a really big piece of this. Nutrition. Of course, nutrition plays a role in this. If we're eating a lot of processed foods, if we're missing a lot of nutrients in our diet, not shaming, not throwing shade at anyone here. If you are vegan or vegetarian, especially if early on and nutrients weren't very closely monitored, very, very, very easy to end up with a lot of nutrient deficiencies that can impact total health and specifically gut health in a pretty big way. So we need to look at that. If you did have a lot of junk food, we want to look at that. There was not a lot of water growing up, which is definitely the case for a lot of people. Definitely for me. I remember I was terrified to use public bathrooms for most of my time in schooling, we'll say with the exception of college. I got over that pretty quick. So when we have these things, chronic dehydration, well, water is really needed for much of our digestive process. If we grew up in a family where you had to eat really fast and you didn't chew a lot of your food, that will impede digestion. Drinking a lot of liquid with your meals, like quickly, yeah, like literally shoving food in your face and not really properly chewing and taking your time. If you're stressed out when you're eating all the time at any point in your life, that can play a big role here. All of this plays a big role. A lot of stress, long-term trauma, all of this plays a role because digestion really starts in the brain. And if we are in a state of fight or flight, fawn, freeze, AKA we're in a traumatized state, we're stuck. We're stuck in one of these states that's going to have a long-term impact on our gut health because digestion, our gut health starts in our brains. And when our nervous system is chronically dysregulated, we are never going to have optimal digestion. And you can't only, for most people, you can't only just do nervous system work and hope everything else will work itself out, because that usually doesn't work either. This is why in our practice, we look at 5 main areas. We look at nutrition, fueling, feeding, supporting your body. We're not big on the restrictive diets. Can do more harm than good for a lot of people. There's a time and a place. We use them in the right times and places, and they're not for everyone. We look at lifestyle. Are you chewing your food? How much liquid, if any, are you having with your meals? Can we limit that? Can we take a few deep breaths and get into a more relaxed state right before you go to eat? New moms, are you actually eating your food? Are you feeding yourself? If you have multiple kids, are you feeding yourself? Are you drinking the water? Are you shoving food in your face? Are you eating scraps of food left by your children? Not the best. Okay, here and there for sure. Do what you have to do. And I've talked to too many women who they drink about 8 to 12 ounces of water a day. Their main food is coffee. It's a whole separate food group for them. And scraps. Just whatever, a little bit of mac and cheese, crust, whatever's left by their children. That is not going to be the most supportive for your overall health, let alone your gut health. If you never eat any sort of probiotic and or prebiotic rich foods, that's another really big one. If you have active gut issues, those foods may not feel the best, which is okay. And once we resolve those acute issues and are starting to heal the body and start to put all the good stuff back in, we absolutely want to have those things in our rotation of foods that we're eating, because it's super important for our gut to have good bacteria, replenishing good bacteria. No, I don't believe everyone should be on a probiotic. Just eat once or twice a week, even some probiotic rich foods, some yogurt, some kefir, some kimchi, some miso, kombucha. There's so many out there. Like, have a little bit of that each week. You don't need a supplement. Don't spend the money on a supplement. You don't need it. And then have some prebiotic rich foods, mostly going to be like different types of vegetables. Fiber, super good for the body. Too much cannot be so good. If you have active digestive issues, fiber can, especially raw veggies in the form of fiber, can be very challenging to digest. And that's some other issues going on. Long term, super good. We want to have those in our bodies very, very regularly here. So these are all things to think about. Then we look at movement. If you are not moving, your digestion is probably not going to be in the best place. One of the very, very simple things that we can do to help with digestion and just overall blood sugar is take a 5 to 10-minute walk after meals. So simple. By the way, it also doesn't have to be like a walk. Go do the dishes. Go just do some things around your office or your house. Just be in an upright position, gentle movement, nothing super stressful, ideally. This goes a long way. Strength training, also very good. Specifically for gut health, well, we can look at some indirect things that could play a role with gut health. Definitely blood sugar regulation. That's a big one. And then, yeah, we use targeted and limited supplementation. 3 to 6 is our goal for most of our clients. Yes, we do go above that sometimes as needed, and we really try and keep it limited. And also, that's not long term. Long term, this should be very few supplements. If you want to do some biohacking, some maximization for your overall health, yeah, we can absolutely talk about that. And we also should not be over supplementing just long term. We shouldn't be on 10, 15, 20 supplements at all times in our lives. That's too much. Poor little liver. It's doing a lot of work. Okay. So all of these forms of stress can play a really big role here. When we look at stress, especially from an acute perspective, meaning from a short-term perspective, let's say we go through a period last year of my life. So last year, we my partner and I got together and we decided to live a very, very different lifestyle, to move to, come down to Arizona here at the time. And then he got sick, diagnosed with cancer treatment. Very stressful period of time. So what's going on in our bodies? What happens when we start to undergo this high levels of acute stress? One of the first things that's going to happen for most people, especially women, is your nervous system. How is your nervous system handling it? I'll tell you, I tried. I feel like I put A for effort into this, and yeah, of course, I became dysregulated. So, of course, my digestion was going to start to have some issues here. And I did extra things to support to make sure it didn't become an issue. And it really didn't until I got a food poisoning issue going on here that impacted my body. So, nervous system. So, once again, digestion starts in the brain, acute stress, dysregulated nervous system, digestion automatically is a little bit disrupted, a little bit to a lot of it, depending on the person. The next thing that happens, so acute stress, usually our body's going to start to release a stress hormone, probably cortisol is going to be the first one. When cortisol rises, stomach acid drops. They have, once again, if we talk about like cortisol and progesterone and in that other episode, talking about stress and hormones, they have an inverse relationship. So does cortisol and stomach acid. Inverse relationship. Cortisol goes up, stomach acid immediately starts to go down. Stomach acid is a huge protector against a lot of things. Pathogens are one, aka bugs that you do not want in your body. It sterilizes a lot, meaning that certain toxins can start to get through. And both of those things can be really big deals when we look at gut health. Our stomach acid, and we can say our digestive enzymes overall, but I'm going to put stomach acid on a little bit of a higher pedestal for most people, that when stomach acid starts to drop, this is really where gut overgrowths love to start to roam free, overgrow, reproduce faster than they're supposed to, and start to become a problem. Because here's the reality of things. We all have bacteria in our body. We have yeast, we have fungus, we have parasites. Not a big deal because they're in quantities where our body can handle it, and they're in places where they're supposed to be, where they can be beneficial. If we look at our gut microbiome, which is our large intestine, we're supposed to have a bunch of bacteria in there. It's supposed to be in there. It's very helpful, very good. And if those bacteria start to travel up into our small intestine, they're not supposed to be there. And this is where SIBO comes from. We have yeast and fungal issues, candida. When that starts to overgrow, it can come up into our throat, and we can have oral thrush issues. We can have issues within our mouth itself, the white coating on the tongue, mouth sores, mouth sensitivity for a lot of people. We can go down to our vaginal microbiome. We can have yeast infections, BV, UTIs, very commonly yeast and fungal related. Parasites, once again, parasites can travel all over the place. For women especially, they love to travel to our reproductive system. So we can end up with parasite overgrowths that can be gut, but they also can travel to other places. I would say our reproductive system, and they often result in hormone imbalances, things like PCOS and endometriosis. There can be a very strong correlation and connection to parasite overgrowths with those. We see that very, very, very regularly. Can travel into our lungs, and we can have some breathing issues, even asthma for some people. It can be rooted in a parasite overgrowth. And I'm not, by a parasite overgrowth, I don't mean a single parasite, not a ropeworm, a tapeworm, a da. I'm talking there are too many parasites, and they have traveled into places where they're not supposed to be, like our lungs. They're not supposed to be hanging out all over the place in our lungs. And I'll tell you, for some people, when we do systemic parasite work, they might pass something like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I feel like I can take a full breath again. Sometimes for the first time in a really long time. And it's because they likely had parasite overgrowth that went up into their guts and they passed it, whether they could visually see that or not, by the way. Not all parasites are visible to the naked eye. They can also be sneaky and hide within stool. And we can see that. And we've seen it plenty of times. We've seen, doing parasite work specifically in the sinuses. That can be very supportive and very helpful. They can impact the immune system. They can just really impact a lot of things within our body. And this low stomach acid connection is a huge piece, which is why we do when we do any sort of rebuilding work after we've done any killing work in the gut sphere, um, stomach acid is a big one. We also look at pancreatic enzymes, overall digestive enzymes, bile flow, bile duct, bile health. All of that really, really plays a big role. Another big factor that goes into this, as I talked about in the hormone episode, is toxin load. Stress goes up, cortisol goes up, and our body wants to get rid of that excess cortisol. Well, that's going to have to be done through our liver. If our liver starts to get a little overwhelmed between this cortisol, maybe trying to do some further work on blood sugar regulation, on doing some extra pathogen work, on different things, the liver, among other drainage systems, plays a really big role in this. And if the liver is not producing good quality, consistent bile, this becomes an issue. Toxin overload can impact our bile duct health, actual bile production, the health of the bile itself, and bile is also recirculated throughout our body, meaning that if it's stale and sludgy and kind of thick, we're going to have a harder time digesting fats, which can lead to a lot of issues. Some people end up losing their gallbladder as a result of this, which is also I'm going to talk about that too. Losing organs, very stressful for the body. The gallbladder is a really big one. I'll say the spleen is another really big one that does a lot with the drainage process, among a few other things. Like, we don't have wasteful organs. All of our organs are necessary. They do have a job. And I would say do your best to keep as many of your organs as you can. And thank goodness for Western medicine in the acute situation where something happens and it's really making us sick. And if you don't do the support that your body needs afterwards, this can result in some issues as well. Toxins will also feed all kinds of gut overgrowth issues, bacteria, yeast, fungus, and parasites. This is a huge piece. I will tell you, almost always, I was trying to think of a time where this was not the case, and I can maybe think of like one, but not even really, where if we're going to do gut work, any sort of gut killing work, we're doing some toxin work. And we're also going to do preparation work by focusing on drainage pathways. That way, when these things will die, they have a clear pathway to come out. And they're all going to release things when they die. That might be gases, that might be extra toxins. And so if we're not in a place where our body can handle those byproducts of the things that are dying, our body can feel really bad. And this is where Herx reactions or detox reactions come into play. This is also why I am not a fan of some of the new quote unquote parasite work that is out. And even people in the functional health space, like trained practitioners, are using some of these medications to do intensive protocols that people are getting incredibly sick. And we see a lot of those people. If your body's not prepared for the killing process and you're not doing the work to address the how and why it got there, and then supporting the body post-killing, your body can be left in a really bad spot. And it can be in a really bad spot during this whole process. You should never just jump into a killing phase if you haven't done any prep work, if you're working with someone and they haven't done any sort of preparation work or talk to you about preparation work. This is a huge red flag for us, that this practitioner may not be the most qualified in understanding fully and completely how the body works and how to best support the body during this whole entire process. So stress can disrupt all of this. Stress can also just disrupt and impact all of our digestive enzymes. So we can see a lower just overall digestive enzyme production, and that will obviously impede gut health overall. Leaky gut. Super common. We get so many people come to us and like, oh, I just have leaky gut and I need to address that, but I don't know how. Leaky gut's not actually a problem. It's how and why the leaky gut got there in the first place. I guarantee there's a stress component to this. And we also, and a variety of stress components. And I'll tell you that if you have gut overgrowth issues, you absolutely have leaky gut. We need to address the gut overgrowth issues. Just giving you some marshmallow roots, some L-glutamine, aloe, all of these things, it's not going to cut it. I also don't need to test you if you have leaky gut. If you have gut overgrowth issues, you have it, and it's a problem. If you have food sensitivities, you have leaky gut. We need to address the bigger picture as to why and how this is happening. Not saying we don't address leaky gut, we absolutely do. And it's one of the very last steps that we do because we need to address all the other things first. Otherwise, it's going to keep coming right back. And our goal is not to keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's to address it when it is time and appropriate to do so it doesn't come back and we don't have ongoing lingering issues. So we need to look at all of this. So we need to replenish, repopulate, heal and cell at the end, look at upper GI support, make sure we are chewing, make sure we are in a more regulated state the majority of the time. And the goal is not to be perfect with any of this. The goal is to be good most of the time. We're on top of this most of the time. So one of the first things that we will recommend if someone does go under an acute period of very high stress, which once again, I think pretty much all of us at some point in our lives are going to go through a period of time like this. Stomach acid support can go a really long way. I'll tell you once again, for me, as someone with a long history of SIBO issues, doing so many protocols, I have HCl with pepsin on hand at all times. It is probably one of the more regular supplements I will take if I'm going to take something. A multivitamin would probably be like number one. And then depending on blood work, I might have a number two. Number three is probably going to be stomach acid support. Not on it all the time. I don't take it with every meal. And when I'm undergoing longer periods of stress, I'm absolutely taking it. It might just be one. It might be 2 or 3 caps. It kind of just depends on how my body's responding. It's also not a long-term solution. It is an acute support tool. Nervous system regulation, continued nervous system regulation, also super important. Once again, I've done so much work on my nervous system. I continue to do a lot of work. I'm still coming out of this stress state from last year. I got food poisoning last year, which didn't help anything. And then I also had the flu earlier this year, which also did not help anything. And my body's now in a pretty good spot. My gut feels pretty darn good. Bowel movements are super good. I'm not having bloating issues. I'm not having any of those things. And yes, I did start to have some of that when I got the food poisoning originally. And then I would say with the flu, it was more actual like my stomach, the organ of my stomach, not my belly, but the organ of my stomach that was having some issues more than anything else. So, we can also run into these acute kind of issues. What if you do get food poisoning? Yeah, that's an issue. That will absolutely impact your gut. Taking a binder of some sort can go a really long way. And I'll tell you, like for me, that's the first thing I did, along with some additional drainage pathway support work. And I did need to do some work. And I chose not to do I chose the antimicrobial route versus an antibiotic route first. Now, I was very open to taking antibiotics if my body did not respond to the supplement protocol. So I also don't want to completely disregard antibiotics. And if there's another way that can be good, if that's okay and safe for you and your body, there's a lot of things that are going to be variables within that decision. I also want to share that, if you do have to have organs removed, if you do have to have a surgery, general anesthesia is very high in heavy metals. The likelihood, if you're not doing great support work for your body, the chances that you're going to have some gut issues after these things is very high. If you do have to go on antibiotics, which might be the case, doing some work after can be super beneficial. I'll tell you, the research around taking a probiotic while you're on antibiotics, the research is a little bit hit or miss. I will say the research from what I have seen, seems to be a little bit stronger of not using probiotics during that period of time and waiting till after. Super depends on the person. There's a lot of routes to go. I'll say one of my favorites is Microbiome Labs has a product called Restore Flora PD. And they have a generalized Restore Flora, which we use a lot in our practice as a probiotic to start to replenish a lot. But then they also have a very specific one called Restore Flora PD. And this one is specifically for post-antibiotic use. And that I've seen really good results with clients using this after they've had to go on antibiotics and to be very supportive for their body. So that can be a really good option. Once again, it's about supporting your body. If you do have to have surgery, okay, we'll do a little bit of drainage pathway support work before and after, just to make sure your body can process all the things out that it once did. If you're having maybe like acute, like once again, acute stress, you've got a big deadline coming up and all of a sudden you're constipated again. Well, let's take some support to help move these things, knowing that's an acute situation. It shouldn't last forever. Um, there's a lot of different options here. For a very gentle option, like Smooth Move Tea is a really good one. A Senna-based product can be a little bit hit or miss. Same thing, magnesium citrate can be a little bit hit or miss. It is a stool softener, but a lot of people can get cramping from that. There's a product from Cellcore that we really like. I'll tell you, we also always have this on hand. It's very rare I have to take this anymore, and that is like one of the things I am most proud of myself and my body, because I was constipated for so long and I was on bowel mover for a really long time too. I almost never have to take it. It's super rare that I have to take it. Even my last parasite protocol I did, the last full moon protocol, I didn't have to take it at all, which is super, super, super cool to see. And just so much pride and appreciation for my body and how it's able to handle that. But Cellcore has a product called Bowel Mover, and there is some senna in it. There's a few other things in it too, and I find that to be one of the most helpful things for a lot of people. So there's a lot of different options. Sometimes just a castor oil pack can go a really long way here. Some just some manual lymphatic work can go a really long way here. But stress is always going to have a really direct impact, and that can be impact it for the hour, can impact it for just the day, the week. And then here's the thing, if we undergo a lot of stress for a long period of time, at some point our body's probably not going to be able to keep up. And this is really where we see chronic gut issues. A big piece of this is just the chronic stress piece. We can also throw in, if you have a high level exposure to heavy metals, this could be from water intake. This could be from just your environment. If you have exposure to a lot of environmental toxins around you, if you live close to a farm or a golf course, and they're using a lot of chemical, not great based products, this can become a really big issue. And once again, like, your body's designed to get this stuff out, except if the demand is too high. And if the demand is too high, meaning the exposure level is too high, and or stress levels are too high, it doesn't have the nutrients it needs. These are all problems. Long-term nutrient deficiencies, a really big problem. Big one for a lot of people is zinc. Man, zinc deficiencies are really, really common. And by the way, please never take zinc by itself long-term. You're going to throw off your zinc and copper balance. That creates its own level of stress and issues within the body. And here's the thing, like, there's so much that goes into this, and there's so much that we are still learning. And I'll also say, like, there's a lot we don't know. And I don't know if we're ever going to know it, or at least not in my lifetime, if we're going to know a lot of this. And the skin the gut plays a really big impact on so many things. Obviously, digestion, nutrients, our skin health, our hormone health, our cognitive health, neurotransmitter pathways. Our gut plays a really big role in a lot of things. And this is why so many people in the functional health space, it all starts in the gut. Cool, I can get behind that. And if we only include, it can all start in the gut, and all of the things that impact the gut, which are the stress, the trauma, the nervous system, the food, the nutrient deficiencies, the drainage pathways, toxin levels, toxin exposure, continued exposure, mycotoxins, mold issues play a really, really big role. If you have all kinds of chronic gut issues and you've done everything under the sun, mold might be the one that's being missed. And this is not We've done a lot of episodes on this. We have a masterclass on that too, and that plays a really big role. If you have a lot of histamine issues, there can be a strong gut component, and it is not the only thing that impacts histamine levels. And also, if you're just going to supplement with DAO for the rest of your life, that is obviously your choice, and your body's designed to make enough if you give it the things that it really needs. So when it comes to stool testing, most stool tests aren't looking at the gut and all of the things that impact the gut. I would say if for us, we don't do a lot of stool testing. It's not our favorite. Once again, it's showing a piece and not the whole piece. And we want to know more of the whole piece, which is why we don't typically run the stool tests. If we are, though, the gut zoomer from Vibrant Wellness is my favorite option. I also don't love a lot of the other like microbiome style tests. I'm not a big fan. Once again, like there's so many things that impact the gut microbiome that if we're only looking at that, we could be missing the bigger picture as to why and how this happened in the first place. So the reason I like the gut zoomer is because we get some insight into some other pieces. It's actually stool and urine for reference. It is pricey. If I remember correctly, it's a little over $700, and that is, once again, at cost. We don't make any money off of testing. Second choice would be a GI map, which is going to be a little bit cheaper. Still not my favorite. It is what it is. An organic acids test. I do really like this test. It's a urine-based test, and we do get some really good insight into the gut. The urine's actually a better marker for yeast and fungal issues. It's going to show up sooner versus stool issues. Stool and urine are also not great for parasites, for reference. We want to look at blood work, specifically the differential part of the CBC. That is the best way, the most accurate way to look at a parasite overgrowth issue. So we need to understand what all of these tests are showing, how they're showing it, how soon things might show up. We get to look at SIBO type bacteria in the organic acids test. We get a look at other types of bacterial issues. We look at some toxin load stuff. We get insight into mitochondrial function, neurotransmitters, blood sugar regulation, nutrient deficiencies, drainage pathways. This is why it's one of our favorite tests, arguably our favorite functional test, because it covers so many different things. It's $300, which for a functional test is pretty darn reasonable. And it's 77 markers. Like, holy moly, it's a great test. And many practitioners are not trained in this for reference, or not very well trained in how to interpret this test. So this can be a really, really great test. I'll also put a link to that in our show notes if you are Rupa store, and you can order. We have a variety of different gut options in there. If you want Vibrant Wellness, please reach out to us directly. Vibrant Wellness does not work with Rupa, and so we have to use a different company. But we have access to all of Vibrant Wellness labs. If you need access to it, and once again, it is at cost to us. And we do go through a third party, so there is a little bit of an upcharge from direct Vibrant Wellness. It's a lot easier for us to use two companies versus dozens of companies for these lab tests, which is why we do it that way. But we only charge what we're charged for any of these things. So, more of the story: stress has a significant direct and indirect impact on gut health. And if you have gut issues, we need to look at your full stress picture in order to understand how and why your body is presenting the way it is, how it's feeling, why it's feeling that way, and how to best support it from a truly holistic perspective so that we're not just symptom managing you. We're not just throwing a bunch of supplements for you to waste time and money on. We're not throwing a bunch of tests at you to waste time and money. We're not doing these things just to do these things. We want to look at the whole picture and address the whole picture so that the goal is to be able to do this stuff once and never really have to do it again, and just do some basic maintenance work. And, for us in our practice, we've got like a resource guide we send to all of our new clients. And then at the end of someone's program, we also send them an end of program resource guide. And a lot of that end of program resource guide talks about exactly this, of how to support your body long term especially when you go through stressful periods of time. And we've got a whole section just on if you are undergoing a lot of stress, what are some ways you should probably support your body or things to think about and how to support your body because it makes a really, really big difference. So, and you don't have to live with gut issues forever. That is not a thing that has to happen if you put in the work and look at the whole body and also continue to prioritize the whole body as you go about your life. So, deeper look at stress and the role it has on gut health. Thank you for listening. As always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really, really, really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.